She was still in her wedding dress. The white silk that had made her feel like a dream 12 hours ago was now heavy with mud, torn at the hem, clinging to her legs like it wanted to be the thing that killed her. Her breath came in short, burning bursts. Her bare feet found every root, every rock, every unforgiving thing the ground had buried in the dark. She did not look back. She could not look back, because looking back meant seeing how close they were, and if she saw how close they were, her legs would stop working entirely. The forest had no mercy. Branches slashed across her arms. The ground disappeared without warning. She stumbled, caught herself on a trunk, kept moving. Her veil was gone. Her shoes were somewhere between here and the life she had woken up believing in this morning. Her chest was on fire. Her lungs had stopped trusting her. Keep moving. Keep moving. Keep moving. She fell the first time on a slope she never saw coming. Her knees hit the earth, so hard the sound of it scared her more than the pain. She lay there for 1 second, just one, and then she heard the voices behind her getting louder, and she pushed herself up with both hands, and she ran. Her knee was bleeding. She could feel the warm, slow slide of it down her shin. She ran anyway. She fell the second time when her ankle twisted on something buried under dead leaves, and the pain that shot up her leg was so sharp and so sudden that she cried out before she could stop herself. A short sound, swallowed fast. But out there in the dark, where every small thing was loud, it was enough. The voices changed direction. They had hurt her. She tried to stand. Her leg refused. She clawed at the ground, pulled herself forward on her hands, her dress dragging behind her like a white flag she was not willing to raise. She was bleeding from her knee and her palms, and somewhere on her forehead where a branch had caught her, and she had not even noticed until now. This was it. This was where it ended. On the ground. In a wedding dress. In a country she had moved to believing in love. She pressed her cheek to the cold earth, and she closed her eyes. Then the hands came. Strong. Certain. Wordless. Someone dropped beside her in the dark and without ceremony, without a single question, hauled her off the ground and onto his back in one motion, and then they were moving. Fast. Faster than she had managed on her own 2 feet. Deeper into the dark, away from the flashlight beams that were slicing through the trees behind them. She held on. She did not know this person. She did not know where they were going. She only knew that 30 seconds ago she had been finished, and now she wasn't, and that was enough for her to lock her arms around his neck and hold on with everything she had left. The voices behind them faded, then disappeared entirely. He didn't stop moving for a long time. And she, Zara, 28 years old, Lagos-born, newly married as of this morning, kept her face pressed against the back of a stranger's neck and tried to remember how to breathe. Welcome to Cross-World Romance Besties. If you are new here, pull up a chair because this story is not for the faint-hearted. Like this video, share it with someone who deserves a good story today, subscribe so you never miss what comes next, and drop in the comments where in the world you are watching from right now. Because what you are about to hear is going to have you feeling things you did not sign up for today. Now, let us go all the way back to the beginning. Because nothing this painful ever starts without a beautiful lie. 3 months before that night in the forest, Zara was standing in a hotel ballroom in Lagos in a dress she had borrowed from her best friend Tolu, eating shrimp she hadn't paid for, and quietly calculating how many more of these corporate networking events she could attend before she ran out of borrowed dresses. She was not supposed to be there. She had been brought along by her colleague Beezy as a +1. Which meant she was technically a guest of a guest, which meant she was one awkward conversation away from being asked to leave. She was managing this possibility by staying near the food table and smiling at exactly no one. That was when she saw him. Or rather, that was when she felt the room change temperature. Kong Jun walked into that ballroom the way powerful men always walked into rooms, like the room had been waiting for him, and he was only mildly impressed by its effort. He was tall, dark suit. The kind of face that made you forget immediately what you were thinking about before you looked at it. He moved through people the way water moved through cracks. Effortless. Inevitable. Zara looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, and then looked away because she was a practical woman, and she had not borrowed this dress to stand in a corner, making eyes at a man who clearly belonged to a different tax bracket. Then Beezy grabbed her elbow. "That is Kong Jun," Beezy whispered, her voice doing the thing it did when she was trying not to sound as excited as she was. "Korean. His family has businesses across 5 countries. He is here for a joint venture with the Adelit Group. He is, Zara, very, very single. Good for him, Zara said. Busy, Zara added. I need you to stop looking at him before he notices us staring. He already noticed, Busy said. Zara did not look up. She reached for another piece of shrimp. Good evening. The voice came from directly in front of her. Low, slightly accented, and entirely too composed for a man who had just walked across a crowded ballroom for no obvious reason. Zara took one breath, put her professional face on, and looked up. Kong Jun was standing close enough that she could see the exact point where his perfectly fitted collar met his neck. Up close, he was even more unreasonable. Dark eyes that missed nothing. A jaw that had clearly never once in its life been uncertain about anything. She said good evening back. He said his name. She said hers. And then, because Zara had not survived 28 years on this earth by falling apart in front of handsome strangers, she asked him what brought him to Lagos, and they talked for 45 minutes, and she made him laugh twice, and he looked at her the whole time like she was the most interesting person in the building. She drove home that night telling herself it meant nothing. Men like that did not mean anything. They were practiced and polished, and they moved on. His number was on her phone by midnight. His first message arrived at 12:30. Good evening was not a sufficient introduction. Can I do better over dinner? She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back. You have 3 attempts. He took all 3. The first dinner was at a restaurant so expensive the menu had no prices. Zara noticed this immediately and found it absurd and told him so. He looked at her like she had said something that surprised him pleasantly. She had not been expecting that reaction. She had expected polished deflection. Instead, he laughed, actually laughed, and told the waiter to bring the menu with prices. She liked that. She stored it somewhere she would later wish she hadn't. He was different from the men she had dated before. Not louder, not flashier, quieter in a way that felt deliberate, like a man who had decided a long time ago that he would never need to fill a room with noise because the room would come to him. He asked her questions and listened to the full answer. He remembered things she said in passing and brought them back later in the conversation. He paid attention in a way that felt like a choice he had made, not a performance he was giving. She went home after that first dinner and called Tolu. He is dangerous, she said. Dangerous how? Tolu said. The kind where you are not afraid of him, Zara said. You are afraid of yourself around him. Tolu was quiet for a moment. Is that bad? I don't know yet, Zara said. She should have known sooner. Because the red flags came. They always do. They just come dressed so nicely that you talk yourself out of seeing the color. The second dinner he canceled an hour before with a gift delivered to her apartment instead. A bracelet in a box she didn't open for 2 days out of principle. When she finally opened it, it was perfect and she hated that it was perfect. He apologized in a way that made the cancellation feel almost reasonable. Something urgent with the business. It won't happen again. She accepted it because he was convincing and because she was human and because the bracelet really was very nice. It happened again. 3 more times over the next 2 months. Each time with an apology that was better than the last, and a gift that she kept telling herself she would return and never returned. Each time she told herself that men with empires had complicated schedules, that this was what life looked like at his level, that she was being inflexible. What she was being was led. But she did not see it then. She saw a man who, when he was present, was entirely present, who flew her to Seoul for a weekend and walked her through the city like he wanted her to see it through his eyes, who remembered that she liked her coffee strong and her evenings quiet, and that her younger sister back in Accra was named Ada, and that she sent half her salary home every month without complaint, who, after 4 months of this careful, measured courtship, took her to dinner at a small restaurant by the river in Seoul, looked at her across a table lit by a single candle, and said he wanted her to be his wife. Zara sat with that sentence for a very long time. You barely know me, she said finally. I know enough, he said, and I want to know the rest. But I want to know it as your husband. That should have been a flag. The certainty of it. The speed of it. The fact that a man who canceled dinners and sent gifts in his place was suddenly in a tremendous hurry to make a permanent decision. She did not see the flag. She saw a man looking at her like she was the answer to something he had been asking for a long time. She said yes. The wedding was in Seoul. 3 weeks later. Which was itself something she should have questioned but didn't, because Kong Jun explained that his schedule wouldn't allow a longer engagement window, and she was so busy planning and calling Ada and borrowing excitement from Tolu, who was shrieking on the phone that she filed the urgency in the back of her mind and did not go back to it. The ceremony was at the Shin family estate, and the estate was enormous, walled and gated and staffed by more people than Zara had ever seen employed in one place. The kind of wealth that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. The kind of wealth that sat back and let you feel small so gradually you didn't notice it was happening. The guests arrived in black cars. Not a few black cars. Dozens. Men in dark suits who moved like they were always standing guard over something even when they were standing still. Women with perfect hair and zero warmth in their eyes. Nobody smiled at Zara the way people smile at a bride. They looked at her with the particular, calibrated attention of people assessing a new variable in an equation they had been running for years. The only person who did not look at her that way was a man she noticed standing slightly to the left of the family group during the pre-ceremony photographs. He was younger than Kang Jun by maybe 4 or 5 years. Leaner, less curated. He had Kang Jun's bone structure, but none of his polish. The way a rough sketch has the shape of a finished painting without the controlled perfection. He stood apart from the family cluster in a way that looked less like shyness and more like a man keeping a deliberate distance from something. He looked at Zara once. Just once. A quick, serious look that lasted half a second. Then he looked away. She didn't know his name yet. She would learn it soon enough. Kang Min Kang, Jun's younger brother. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Cold and beautiful, which she would only understand later was a description that applied to everything in that house. The flowers were perfect. The music was perfect. Kang Jun said his vows in a voice that was steady and precise and entirely unreadable. Zara said hers and meant every word and felt the kind of terrifying hope that comes from wanting something so completely that you make yourself vulnerable to it entirely. Then it was done. She was his wife. She just didn't know yet what that meant in this house. The reception was enormous. 200 guests, maybe more, in a ballroom that had been designed to make human beings feel appropriately small. Zara moved through it on her husband's arm and smiled until her face hurt. Kang Jun was gracious and composed and introduced her to people whose names she immediately lost because she was too busy watching the room. Because the room was doing something. It was watching her back. Not obviously, not rudely, but consistently. Every cluster of guests they passed fell momentarily quiet and then resumed talking the second they moved away. Phones came out at angles that were not quite discreet enough. Eyes tracked her across the room with the particular attention of people storing information. Was it because she was Nigerian? Was it because she was the boss's new wife? Was it something else entirely? She didn't know. She filed it away and kept smiling. Kang Jun disappeared after the first hour. Not all at once. Gradually. A pull to speak with this person. A moment he stepped away to take a call. Another conversation that ran longer than expected. Each absence was plausible on its own. Together they added up to a husband who had ceased to be present at his own wedding reception. Zara found herself standing with a glass of champagne she hadn't drunk, next to a window, alone, at her own wedding. And she was doing the thing she did when she needed to not look like what she actually felt. She was looking at the view. You look like you were memorizing the exits. She turned. Kang Min was beside her. Up close he was less composed than from a distance. He had the slight restlessness of someone who was at an event because obligation demanded it, and not because he wanted to be. There was something careful in the way he said the words. Not cruel. Not warming her. Something more complicated than either of those things. I was looking at the garden, she said. He glanced out the window. You were looking at the gate, he said. She considered denying this and decided not to bother. Is there a difference? She asked. Something moved across his face. Yes, he said. One of them lets you leave. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. And in that half-second of honesty between two people at a wedding that neither of them seemed entirely comfortable at, something passed between them that she also filed away and would later wish she had paid more attention to in real time. Then someone called his name from across the room, and he straightened and gave her a nod that was not quite a bow and walked away. She watched him go. Then she went back to waiting for her husband to return. He didn't return. Not really. He came back at intervals, stood beside her long enough to look married, and then drifted again. By the time the guests began leaving, Zara had been on her feet for 7 hours in heels she should have practiced in longer, had eaten almost nothing because the catering was served in rounds and she kept missing the rounds, and had held a smile in place so long her jaw ached. A staff member she hadn't met showed her to the room she would share with her husband. A room that was larger than her entire apartment in Lagos. Pristine. Silent. A bed so wide it had its own geography. She sat on the edge of it in her wedding dress and waited. Kong Jun did not come. She told herself he was wrapping up with guests. Then she told herself he was dealing with something urgent. Then she told herself she was overthinking. Then the clock on the wall moved past 11, and she lay down on top of the covers still in her dress, because she was not going to change into something comfortable and admit to herself that she was spending her wedding night alone. She was going to wait. She waited. She fell asleep waiting. In her wedding dress, on top of the covers, with the lamp still on, in a house that belonged to her husband's family and felt nothing like home. She woke at 1:47 in the morning. The room was exactly as she had left it. Lamp on. Covers undisturbed. The space beside her empty and cold in a way that told her clearly it had been empty all night. She lay still for a moment. She stared at the ceiling. She breathed. Then she got up. Not out of anger. She was not an angry woman by nature, or at least she had never been, not yet. She got up out of something quieter and more persistent than anger. Loneliness. The particular loneliness of a person who has just made the biggest decision of their life and found themselves entirely alone with it. She would go find him. She would not make it dramatic. She would not demand anything. She would simply find her husband, on her wedding night, and sit near him for 5 minutes, and that would be enough. She left the room. The compound at 2 in the morning was not dark. That was the first thing she noticed. There were lights on in places she hadn't expected. Staff moving in corridors at angles that suggested purpose rather than night duties. A hum underneath the silence of the building, like a house that was awake in layers she hadn't been shown. She followed the light. It led her down a hallway she hadn't walked before, past a door she had thought was a wall, and through a passage that opened onto a courtyard she had not known existed. She stopped at the entrance. She could see her husband. He was standing in the center of the courtyard with his back partially to her. 2 men were kneeling on the ground in front of him. Not kneeling in the way people kneel when they are praying. Kneeling in the way people kneel when they have been put there and do not have the option to stand. Kong Jun's voice was low, controlled. She couldn't hear the words from where she was, but she could hear the tone, cold and certain and completely unmoved. Then the sound. 2 sounds, actually. Quick. Final. And the 2 men were no longer kneeling. Zara's hand went to her mouth. Her whole body went still. Every single functioning part of her brain was screaming at her legs to move, and her legs were not moving. Kong Jun turned slightly, said something to the men standing behind him. Drag them out. The words reached her clearly now that the courtyard was quiet. Take them through the east passage. Bury them before morning. Make sure no one sees you moving. The men began moving. And then Zara saw the figure behind the drum. A man, crouched low, pressed against the shadow of one of the large drums against the courtyard wall. He had been there the whole time, watching. A worker maybe. Someone who had been in the wrong place and hadn't known how to leave it. Kong Jun looked up. He looked up the way people who have spent years noticing things they weren't supposed to miss look up. Not because he heard something. Because something in the air changed. The man behind the drum moved. Or breathed too loud. Or was simply unlucky. Kong Jun's gaze found him in 3 seconds. There was no hesitation. Not even the pause of a man calculating consequences. Just the swift, decisive certainty of someone who had already made the rule and saw no need to debate its application. I leave no witnesses. The man behind the drum was gone in the next moment. And Zara had not moved. She had not breathed. She was standing in the passage entrance with her hand still over her mouth and her wedding dress still on, and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She took 1 step back. Her heel caught the edge of the passage floor. The sound it made was small, barely a click against stone. But in a silent courtyard at 2 in the morning, it was everything. One of the men looked up, looked toward the passage, looked at the point where the light changed. Zara ran. And besties, if your heart is already pounding, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Like this video right now, drop a comment that says I am here. Subscribe if you have not already, because we are only just getting started, and what comes next will break something open in your chest. Now let us keep going. She ran the way people run when survival has overridden everything else. Not strategically, not toward anything, just away, back through the passage, into the hallway, through a door that opened to outside air, and then she was in the grounds, and she was running across grass, and she did not know this compound. She had been here less than 24 hours. She didn't know where the walls were or the gates, or where the darkness thickened into forest at the edge of the property. She found the forest. The trees closed around her, and the grass became roots and uneven ground, and her bare feet found every hard and painful thing the earth had to offer. Behind her she could hear them. Not loud, not panicked, methodical. The sound of men who did this for a living and were in no particular hurry because they were confident in the outcome. That confidence made her run faster than she thought she could. She ran until her lungs were burning and her legs were shaking, and then her ankle went. Not a small twist. A real one. The kind that sends pain shooting straight up your leg and drops you before you understand what has happened. She hit the ground hard. Her hands caught some of it. Her knees caught the rest. She lay there for a moment in the dark, in her wedding dress, bleeding from her palms and her knees, her ankle screaming. The voices somewhere behind her still steady and still coming. She tried to stand. Her leg would not hold her. She tried again. Got halfway up. Her ankle folded. She went back down. She was going to die here. In a forest. In South Korea. In a wedding dress with her sister's number saved in her phone and her mother's voice in her ear from this morning saying, "Zara, you look so beautiful today." She was going to die in this dress, and Ada was going to get a call, and there would be nothing left to explain. She pressed her forehead to the ground. Then the hands. She knew the moment they touched her that they were not Kong Jun's men. The grip was purposeful but not cruel. Not threat. Something else. He didn't say a word. He dropped beside her in the dark, assessed her ankle in 2 seconds with a quick, careful press of his fingers, and then he pulled her up, turned, and loaded her onto his back like she weighed nothing, like this was something he had been ready to do, and then he ran. He was fast. Faster than she would have expected from a man carrying another person's full weight through a dark forest in the middle of the night. He knew where he was going. He moved through the trees with the confidence of someone who had mapped this place long before tonight. She held on, her arms around his neck, her face against the back of his shoulder. She could feel his breathing, steady and controlled even under the exertion, the breathing of a man who had been trained in situations that required him to keep his head when everything else was chaos. The voices faded, then stopped. He kept moving for another 5 minutes before he slowed and stopped in a small clearing where the trees thinned enough that the sky came through. He crouched slowly and let her slide from his back to the ground, catching her weight so she landed sitting rather than falling. Then he turned around. It was Kong Min. She looked at him, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. He was breathing harder now. There was dirt on his jacket, and something dark on his forearm. She chose not to look at too closely. "You are bleeding," he said. His voice was low, clipped, practical. "So I am," she said. He looked at her ankle, then at her hands, then at her face. A quick, efficient assessment that took in the information and did not dramatize it. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. He nodded, as if this was a problem he had anticipated and had a plan for. He sat down across from her in the dirt of the forest floor in what was clearly an expensive suit, and he said, quietly, "We need to stay off the paths for another 20 minutes. Then I can move you somewhere safer." She looked at him. The brother. The one who had stood at the edge of the wedding like a man, trying to hold himself apart from something he couldn't stop. "You knew," she said. It was not a question. He held her gaze. "Not all of it. But enough." "Enough what?" she said. "Enough that you should not have been here." She felt the words land somewhere deep and quiet and devastating. Not because they were unkind. Because they were true. "Why didn't you say something?" she said. He looked away. Into the dark between the trees. He was quiet for a long time. "Because no one in that house says something," he said finally. And then quietly, like it cost him something to say it out loud. "And because I told myself it wouldn't be like this. That he would at least keep you away from it." She absorbed that. "He didn't," she said. "No," said Kong Min. "He didn't." They sat in the forest in silence for a while. Her ankle was swelling. Her dress was destroyed. Somewhere behind them was a compound where her husband had just ordered the disposal of 2 bodies without blinking, and had turned that same order on a witness without pausing. "We need to talk about what happens next," she said. Kong Min looked back at her. "Yes," he said. "We do." What happened next was not what Zara had imagined her life after marriage would look like. She had imagined that marriage would feel like arriving somewhere. Like the particular exhale of a person who has been traveling for a long time and has finally walked through a door that belongs to them. Instead, she woke up the next morning in the room she had been assigned, and the first thing she was aware of was the silence of the house, and the second thing was the pain in her ankle, and the third thing was the memory of the courtyard arriving in her chest like cold water. It had not been a dream. She lay still in the enormous bed and looked at the ceiling and broke it into pieces. One at a time. Her husband had killed 2 men last night. He had then killed a witness. She had run. Kong Min had found her. She was here. In this room. In this house. With nowhere to go. That last piece was the one that sat heaviest. Because Zara was not a woman who stayed in situations that were wrong for her. She had left a university program she hated in her second year. She had walked away from a relationship at 24 when she saw clearly that the man she was with wanted someone quieter, smaller, more convenient than she was. She had always trusted her ability to leave when leaving was necessary. But this was not Lagos. She was in South Korea in a compound with guards at every gate, and she did not speak the language, and she did not know the city, and she had a sister back in Accra who Kong Jun knew about, who he had asked about, who he had listened to her describe in careful, loving detail over dinners she now understood had been intelligence gathering dressed as courtship. She knew without anyone having to say it directly that Ada was leverage. She was not a woman who stayed in situations that were wrong for her. But she was also a woman who understood that leaving a mafia compound without a plan was not leaving. It was disappearing in a different direction. She needed time. She needed to think. She needed to understand the shape of the cage before she could find the door. She got up, washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror for a long time, put her professional face on, walked out of the room. The house in daylight was different from the house at night. Wide corridors with art on the walls that probably had names attached to them that Zara didn't know. Staff who moved quietly and always at an angle that suggested they were employed not just to work, but to be invisible while doing it. Breakfast was laid out in a dining room with windows that looked over a garden that was immaculate in the specific, loveless way of spaces maintained by professionals rather than tended by people who cared about them. Kong Jun was already at the table. He looked up when she entered. He was in a clean suit. He had his phone in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, and he looked entirely, completely, devastatingly normal. Like a man who had slept well and was ready for his working day. Like a man who had not, 12 hours ago, made 2 bodies disappear. "Good morning," he said. She sat across from him. She poured herself tea. She said good morning back. And just like that, this was the shape of the marriage. A man who could shift registers completely. Who could be the person who did what she had seen him do and then sit across a breakfast table the next morning and be entirely unremarkable. She understood now why no one in that house said anything. Because the man at the head of the table made the alternative very clear. She drank her tea. "I heard you had a difficult night," he said, not looking up from his phone. His tone was neutral, informational. Her grip on the cup tightened very slightly. "I went looking for you," she said. "I got lost." He looked up then. His eyes were the same eyes she had looked into over candlelit dinners in Seoul. Sharp, calm, giving away precisely nothing. "This is a large house," he said. "You will learn it." He looked back at his phone. That was all. No acknowledgement of where she had been. No acknowledgement of what she might have seen. No question about her ankle, which was wrapped in cloth because Kong Min had found her a bandage before he walked her back through the service entrance in the early hours of the morning, moving quietly and efficiently, and without speaking more than was necessary. Just, "This is a large house. You will learn it." She understood the message. She smiled, picked up her toast, and filed away the understanding that she was on her own in this house. And that looking like she knew that was the most dangerous thing she could do. The days that followed had the texture of a performance she had not auditioned for and had not been given a script to. Kong Jun was home infrequently. When he was home, he was present in the surface way of a man fulfilling an obligation he had budgeted a specific amount of time for. Breakfast sometimes, dinner occasionally. He asked questions about her comfort and her needs and arranged for them to be met, and then left the room. He never raised his voice. He never threatened her. He never once came to her room. She had not been married. She had been installed. The house staff were polite and efficient and kept a precise professional distance. The one exception was a woman named Mrs. Park who managed the household and who looked at Zara with an expression that lived somewhere between sympathy and warning and never tipped fully into either. Kong Jun's mother lived in a separate wing of the compound and made her opinion of Zara clear without ever saying a single word about it. She appeared at meals with the contained disapproval of a woman who had wanted a specific kind of wife for her son and had received instead a Nigerian woman with natural hair and opinions. She looked at Zara the way people look at whether they consider inconvenient. Not hateful, just profoundly uninterested in adjusting to accommodate it. Zara smiled at her every morning and gave her absolutely nothing to work with. But the loneliness was real. It was enormous and heavy, and it sat in the middle of her chest from the moment she opened her eyes to the moment she closed them. She called Ada every evening and was careful about what she said, and said "I am fine" so many times that Ada, who knew her entirely, eventually said, "Zara, I know you, and fine is not a complete sentence." "I am adjusting," Zara said. "It is a big house. It takes time." Ada was quiet for a moment. "You love him?" she asked. Zara looked at the wall of the room that had been her room for 12 days now, and thought about the courtyard and the cold precision of her husband's voice and the fact that he had not been to her room once. "I am learning him," she said, which was true, just not in the way Ada meant. "And besties, I need you to hang on right here, because what is about to happen in this story is the part that changes everything. Before we go there, have you liked this video yet? Drop a comment right now saying day one, because you deserve to tell someone you made it this far. Subscribe if you have not. And now let us keep going. She found the library by accident. It was on the east wing, a door that looked like storage but opened onto a long, narrow room lined floor to ceiling with books. Old ones. The kind with spines that had faded past the point of legibility. There was a window at the far end that faced the garden and a chair in front of it, angled toward the light, with a small table beside it. She did not know who used this room. She did not know if anyone did. But she came back the next afternoon with a book from the small stack she had brought from Lagos, and she sat in the chair in the eastward light, and for the first time since she had arrived in this house, her chest unclenched. She started coming every afternoon. On the fourth afternoon, she was halfway through her second book when the door opened. She looked up. Kong Min stood in the doorway. He looked at her in the chair, at the book in her lap, at the cup of tea on the small table. He had the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he came to check was empty and found it occupied. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't know anyone used this room." Zara looked at him carefully. "I didn't know anyone else did either," she said. A pause. He stepped in and moved to the shelves on the far wall and pulled a book with the practiced efficiency of a man who knew exactly where everything was, which told her that this was his room, that she had accidentally colonized his space. "I can use a different room," she said. "No," he said. He didn't look at her. He found the book and turned to go. "You can stay," she said. She didn't know why she said it. She was alone in this house in all the ways that mattered, and here was the only person who had told her anything true, and she was not going to pretend that didn't mean something. He stopped. He turned back and looked at her for a moment, something working through his expression that he did not let reach the surface. Then he moved to the other chair against the opposite wall, and he sat down with his book. They sat in that room for an hour, not talking, just two people reading in the same space, the afternoon light changing slowly, the house silent around them. When she left, she noticed that her tea had gone cold, and she had read the same page 4 times without retaining any of it. It became a thing they did, not something discussed or planned, not something acknowledged out loud. She was in the library in the afternoons, and sometimes he came, and sometimes he didn't, and when he came they sat and read, or sometimes talked about small things. The book she was reading, whether the garden was maintained by one person or many, whether she missed Lagos. She said yes every time he asked that one because it was the one question she didn't have to manage her answer to. She learned things about him in the same way, in pieces, that he had studied architecture in London for 2 years before being pulled back, that he liked the East Wing because the light was better in the afternoons, that he had a scar along his left jaw from something he didn't explain and she didn't ask about, that he had a quality when he was tired of letting his guard down in the specific way of someone who doesn't have many people they put their guard down around and has gotten out of practice with the feeling. She noticed his hands one afternoon. The way he held a book, careful and deliberate, like things he valued deserved to be held that way. She noticed this, and then she noticed that she had noticed it, and she went back to her page. She was not foolish. She knew what this was, or what it was becoming. She could feel it the way you can feel a change in weather before it arrives, not the thing itself yet, but the pressure of it building. She had been lonely and frightened and profoundly, structurally alone in this house, And there was a person in this library who looked at her like she was a complete human being, which was more than anyone else here had managed. She told herself every night that it was friendship and nothing more. She almost believed herself. The first time she saw how the house really worked was a Tuesday. She had been in the compound for 3 weeks. She had learned the geography of it. She had learned which staff to greet and which ones preferred invisibility. She had learned that dinner was at 8, and that Kong Jun attended perhaps 2 out of every 5 of them, and that his absence was never explained or apologized for. She had not learned the full nature of the business conducted in this house. Not because she wasn't paying attention, because it moved through rooms she didn't have access to. In languages of power and implication, she was still learning. Until Tuesday. She was crossing the main hall toward the east wing when she heard voices behind a door she had previously assumed was a meeting room. The door was not fully closed, and the voice she heard through the gap was Kong Jun's. She did not stop. She slowed, and she heard enough. A name she didn't recognize. A number that was too large to be anything ordinary. A phrase used twice that she would look up later on her phone and spend a long time sitting with the results of. She walked on. She went to the library. She sat down without her book. She was not naive. She had known, in the way people know things they haven't yet had confirmed, that the world her husband operated in was not legitimate business. She had known it the way you know a thing when the evidence is everywhere, but nothing is said directly. She knew it directly now, and the question that sat in front of her was not whether she had married into something dangerous. The question was how deep in she was, how visible she had become, and whether visibility in this world was an asset or a liability. She thought about Ada. She thought about Kong Jun's eyes across the breakfast table. She picked up her book. She read the same page 6 times. She went to dinner at 8 and smiled and ate and said the right things and gave nothing away. She was learning the language of this house. She didn't want to be fluent in it, but she understood now that fluency was survival. It was Kong Min who told her about the council. Not deliberately, not with the intention of warning her. Although she thought later that maybe some part of him had chosen what he shared and how carefully. They were in the library. Late afternoon. They had been talking about nothing in particular, which was what they did before they talked about something that mattered. And then he said, "Does Kong Jun know you come here?" She looked up from her book. "I come here every day," she said. If he wanted to know, he would know. Kong Min was quiet for a moment. "That is true of most things in this house," he said. She set her book down. "The marriage," she said carefully. "It had conditions." He was still for a moment. "Yes," he said. "From the family council," she said. He looked at her then. She could see him calculating what she knew, what she had pieced together, how much she had figured out on her own. There were conditions, he said, on timing, and on the type of woman chosen. Meaning, she said, someone without complicating connections. He held her gaze and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She had known this. She had felt the shape of it for days. But hearing it confirmed even obliquely was different from knowing it as suspicion. It sat inside her chest and changed the temperature of the room. "So I was selected," she said. "Not chosen." He looked at the window. "Those are not the same thing in this family," he said. "I know," she said. "That is exactly what I mean." The silence after that had weight in it. Then he said, very quietly, "You deserve better than what you got." It was a simple sentence. Nothing extraordinary about the words. But he said it like he meant it entirely, without performance, without agenda, and she was not prepared for it, and it undid something in her chest that she had been working very hard to keep in place. She looked at him. He was looking at her. And right there in that quiet library in the East Wing, something shifted between them. Not a kiss. Not a declaration. Just a shift. A mutual helpless acknowledgement of something they had both been trying very carefully not to name. He looked away first. She looked away second. Neither of them said anything else. When she left that evening, she walked to her room, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she put both hands over her face, and she stayed that way for a long time. Not crying. Just letting herself feel the full weight of the situation she was in. The wrongness of it. The danger of it. The fact that the only person in this compound who looked at her like she was a complete human being was the person she was most absolutely not allowed to feel anything for. She was the wife of the man's brother. She was trapped in a marriage she could not leave without consequences she could not predict. She was falling. She could feel it. "Besties, I need you to breathe for a second because I know what just happened and you know what just happened, and now you understand why this story is going to keep you up tonight." If you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right now, like this video, and drop me a comment that says I feel it because I know you do. We are going into the second half, and it only gets more intense from here. Kong Jun left for a business trip, and the house exhaled. Zara exhaled. She slept better those nights. Ate better. Walked the compound without the particular vigilance she maintained when Kong Jun was home. She called Ada and let herself be more honest. Not fully honest, but closer. She went to the library every day. Kong Min was there every day. On the third day of Kong Jun's absence, they talked for 4 hours without stopping. She told him about growing up in Accra, about her mother who could cook 8 things, and every one of them was perfect, and she had learned none of them because she was always too busy reading. About Ada, who was 10 years younger and had been more parent than sibling since their mother's health had declined. About coming to Lagos at 22 with a bag and a contact number and the absolute certainty that she was going to build something. He listened to all of it. He told her about London. 2 years of architecture school before the call came to return. He told it without self-pity, which made it land harder. The particular resignation of someone who had understood very young that in his family, want was not the relevant consideration. That lives were organized around the structure and what the structure required, and individuals adjusted themselves to fit. Did you ever want to go back? She asked. Every day for the first year, he said. Then you stop wanting the thing that is not possible, and you start working with what is. That sounds very disciplined, she said. He looked at her with something dry and warm in his expression that she was learning to recognize. That is extremely polite of you, he said. She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh. Full and genuine and unguarded in the way that laughter is when you are genuinely caught off guard by something. He watched her laugh. His expression did the thing it did sometimes. Something warm and unmanaged that he reined back in before it fully arrived at the surface. You should do that more, he said. What? She said. That, he said. Just that. She looked at him. He looked back. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did in that room, and she was aware of how close they were sitting, closer than they had started out sitting months ago, the distance between them having reduced incrementally over weeks in the way that proximity reduces when no one explicitly addresses it. She was aware of his hand on the arm of his chair. She looked back at her book. He looked back at his. Neither of them said anything else for an hour. When she stood to leave, he stood too, his body making a decision before his mind weighed in on it. She was close enough that standing brought her nearer to him than she had intended. She looked up. He was looking down. The room was very quiet. She could feel the warmth of him from this distance. She was aware of his breathing. She was aware of every inch of the space between them, which was not very many inches, and the fact that neither of them was moving. Zara, he said. Just her name. Quiet. I know, she said. She stepped back. He stepped back. She picked up her book from the chair. Good night, she said, even though it was 5 in the afternoon. Good night, he said. She walked out and down the corridor and all the way to her room, and she sat down on the floor, back against the bed, and she stayed there for a long time. She was in serious trouble. Kong Jun came back, and the house contracted again. He brought her a gift. A scarf from a shop she didn't know. He handed it to her with the same efficiency he used for everything and went to his study. She thanked him. She put the scarf in the drawer she had designated for things she would never use. That following morning, one of the household staff, a young woman named Sue who was the closest thing Zara had to an ally in the house, knocked on her door and handed her an envelope. She opened it after Sue left. It was a single sheet of paper. Printed. No signature. She read it once. Then she read it again. The document she was holding was a summary of the marriage contract. The one that had been arranged not between Kong Jun and Zara, but between Kong Jun and the council. The conditions. The timeline. The clause that she would have to read 4 times before she fully understood what it was saying. The marriage had a purpose. A specific documented purpose. And it had a point after which the purpose would be considered fulfilled. After which, she set the paper down. She had known she was selected and not chosen. She had carried that knowledge in a box in the back of her chest for weeks and managed it. But this was different. This was the knowledge that there was a plan for what happened to her after the purpose was fulfilled. And the plan had not considered her preferences. She folded the paper neatly, put it back in the envelope, and placed it at the bottom of the drawer under the scarf. Evidence, she thought. Keep it. She went to breakfast. She smiled. She ate. She said good morning to the mother-in-law and received a non-response and filed it under irrelevant. She went through the whole day like this. Composed. Functional. Present. She went to the library. Kong Min looked up when she came in. He took one look at her face and put his book down. What happened? He said. She sat down. She looked at him. How much of it did you know? She said. He was still. The clause, she said. The timeline. What I am here for and what happens when that is considered done. His jaw tightened. Subtle. She almost missed it. How much? She said again. He looked at his hands. Then at the window. Then at her. More than I should have been comfortable with, he said. She nodded. She had expected something like this. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. He looked at her. His expression holding something in very carefully. Because telling you would have required me to be honest about all of it, he said. Including the parts where I was complicit in your being here. And I didn't know how to do that without losing. He stopped. Losing what? She said. This, he said. The word was quiet. And there it was. She looked at him. He looked at her. The afternoon light was the same as always. The room was the same. The house beyond the door was the same dangerous, beautiful, suffocating thing it had always been. She had no room for what she felt. No safe place to put it. She was a married woman in a Mafia compound with a document in her drawer that described her future in terms she had not consented to. And the man across from her was her husband's brother, and the only warm thing she had found in this cold house, and she could not have any of this. She knew all of that. She still reached over and put her hand over his. He went very still. She didn't look at him. She looked at their hands. I know, she said. I know what this is, and I know what it isn't, and I know what it cannot be. She paused. And I know I just did that anyway. He turned his hand over slowly. Held hers. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. This is the part, he said finally, where a sensible person walks away. Are you walking away? She asked. He looked at their hands. He looked at her face. No, he said. Then they sat there, in the library, in the East Wing, in the afternoon, holding hands like two people who had found each other in the worst possible place under the worst possible circumstances and had made a quiet, terrified, entirely human decision to hold on anyway. There was a dinner with family associates not long after. A room full of people she didn't know and didn't trust. One of the guests, a man introduced as a business associate of Kong Jun's, spent 20 minutes of the pre-dinner reception talking to Zara in a way that made the back of her neck uncomfortable. Nothing she could name directly, but a quality to his attention that she recognized. The kind that assessed before it appreciated. He made a comment about her bracelet, reached out and touched it without asking. She moved her arm back smoothly, kept her smile in place, said something non-committal and turned away. She felt someone look at her from across the room. She glanced up. Kong Min was across the room with a drink in his hand, and his eyes were on the man who had touched her bracelet. His expression was entirely composed. His eyes were not. She looked away before anyone could track the exchange. After dinner, during the period where guests moved around and conversations reformed, Kong Min appeared beside her. Not dramatically, just there. Are you all right? He said. Quiet enough that it was only for her. She looked at him sideways. Yes, she said. He looked at the room. At the man with too much confidence. His jaw doing the subtle thing. Kong Min, she said quietly. He looked at her. I am fine, she said. I have been handling men like that since before I could vote. Something in his expression shifted. Not entirely to amusement, but close. I know you have, he said. Then let me handle it, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back slightly, giving her room, staying close enough to be visible. She almost smiled. She managed not to. And now, besties, before this next part, I need you to share this video with at least one person right now because what is coming will have both of you screaming. Subscribe, drop where you are watching from, and let us finish this story together. It was a night she would not forget. She woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of raised voices somewhere in the lower levels of the compound. She lay still and listened. Not the cold, controlled precision of Kong Jun's usual register. Something rawer. An argument in Korean she couldn't fully follow but could read well enough in its emotional temperature. She heard Kong Min's voice. She recognized it immediately. Lower than Kong Jun's. Controlled, but not perfectly. The control of a man keeping a lid on something that wanted very much to come off. She heard Kong Jun's voice cut through. Then silence. The next morning Kong Min had a bruise on his jaw that had not been there the day before. She saw it at breakfast. She said nothing. He met her eyes for a fraction of a second and then looked at his plate. She ate her breakfast. She said good morning to the mother-in-law. She poured herself tea. She went to the library that afternoon. He came. She did not ask about the bruise. She understood asking about it was a declaration she could not make in this house. She reached over without looking at him and put her fingers briefly against his jaw, on the undamaged side. Just her fingertips. 1 second. Then she took her hand back. He went very still. She opened her book. Neither of them spoke. But his hand found hers on the armrest between the chairs, and he held it, and she held back, and they sat like that for the rest of the afternoon. The day everything changed did not arrive announced. She had been in the library for an hour. Kong Min had come, and they had sat and eventually put their books down and talked the way they sometimes talked now when the house was quiet and the light was right, and they had both stopped pretending they were there for the books. He told her something he had not told her before. About the person he had lost 3 years ago. Not at length. With the brevity of someone who had processed it to the point of being able to say the words without falling apart and did not yet know what to do with what was left after the falling apart stopped. She listened. She did not say I am sorry because she had learned that he did not need I am sorry. He needed someone to hear it and not flinch. She heard it. She did not flinch. He looked at her. The full look. The one he usually held back from. How are you not afraid of me? He said. Not as a challenge. As a genuine question. She thought about it. Because you have never given me a reason to be, she said. And I have been paying attention. He was quiet for a moment. Most people are afraid of this family, he said. I know, she said. I am afraid of this family. She looked at him. I am not afraid of you. Something in his expression moved. Closer to the surface than she had seen before. Zara, he said. Her name in his voice. With that quality of attention that made her feel visible in a way she had been starving for. She looked at him. He looked back. And they were very close. Closer than they had started the afternoon. She could feel the warmth of him. She was aware of his breathing and her own. She had known this was coming for weeks, and she had been careful and careful and careful, and she was so tired of being careful in a house that was always watching her, and she was sitting next to the one person who made her feel like a person, and he kissed her. Or she kissed him. She was never entirely sure afterward. It was probably both. The simultaneous arrival of something that had been building long enough to have become inevitable. It was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was the kiss of two people who had been holding something back for a long time and had finally, quietly, without announcement, let it go. Her hand went to his jaw. His hand came up to her face. The library was quiet. The house was quiet. And neither of them were anywhere but there. They pulled back. They looked at each other. She was breathing too fast. He was not entirely steady either. She pressed her forehead briefly to his, and then she sat back and looked at the window. This is complicated, she said. Yes, he said. I don't know what this means for. I know, he said. There are so many ways this is. I know, he said again. She looked at him. I don't regret it, she said, which was the truest thing she had said in months. He looked at her with everything he had been carefully not showing for weeks. Neither do I, he said. They sat in the library in the wreckage and beauty of what they had done and said nothing else for a long time. There is a particular kind of knowing that lives in your body before your mind has caught up with it. Zara had been feeling it for 3 weeks. A quiet, insistent signal underneath everything else. Something that made her tire more easily. Something that made the smell of the breakfast coffee complicated in a way it had never been. She sat with it. She turned it over. She did not yet say it out loud because saying it out loud would make it real, and real was a category she was not ready for. Then she was ready. She sat in the library on a Tuesday afternoon in the particular blue-gold light of the hour before evening, and she looked at Kong Min across the space between them, and she said, quietly, I need to tell you something. He put his book down. He looked at her. She looked at her hands. Then at him. I am pregnant, she said. The room went very still. He sat with the sentence for a long time. She watched his face. She watched him absorb it. She watched the complicated landscape of what that meant move through his expression. The parts that were afraid. The parts that were. And this was the part she had not expected, and the part that broke something open gently in her chest. Not afraid at all. He reached over and took her hand. She looked at their hands. She looked at him. He started to say something. And that was when the shadow moved at the door. A shape in the gap of the door that had been open the precise, careless amount of an inch that was just enough. A pause that was a fraction too long to be a person simply passing. Then rapid footsteps moving away down the corridor. Both of them looked at the door. The corridor was empty, but the footsteps were already fading. Someone had heard. She looked at Kong Min. His face had gone very still in the way it went when he was processing danger. Not panic. The cold, precise alertness of a man who had grown up in a world where every crisis required a clear head. He looked at her. Her heart was hammering. Everything she had been holding together in this house, every careful performance, every managed smile, every calculated word, all of it had just shifted on its axis in the space of a closing door and retreating footsteps. Someone knew. If your heart is in your throat right now, then you are exactly where I need you to be. Who heard them? What happens when Kong Jun finds out? Will Kong Min accept the pregnancy? Or what does Kong Min do when the most dangerous man in that house turns his attention toward the thing he is protecting? Subscribe right now because part 2 is coming and it is going to be everything. Like this video. Share it. Leave a comment that says I need part 2 and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I will see you in part 2. Do not go anywhere.